One early winter morning in 2014, I woke up for my shift at Starbucks. My little orange Fiat dinging when I got in, letting me know to be extra cautious since the temperature was cold enough to cause black ice. However, black ice wouldn't cross my mind as I pulled up to the stoplight next to another Fiat. My windows were down just enough to drag the smoke out of my car when it started moving, because I enjoyed sneaking a smoke on the way to work as a small defiance to my parents, since, after all, I was the one paying for it. I pulled up next to an ice blue Fiat and noticed the driver, an older man in his late 60s with a leathered face, greasy hair plastered to his skull at the top, yet hanging down in gray wisps towards the bottom, had put his window down and signaled for me to crack mine more. I did. There's a defining moment in movies and books where the main character knows that they fucked up. The moment that the music fades and the sinking feeling sets in, letting them know that they've made a mistake. Looking in the face of this man, just happily telling me that he liked the color of my car, I felt no threat at first. I drove the rest of the way to work without incident and let the man in the ice blue Fiat slip from my mind, going on to work to steam milk for grumpy businessmen and stressed out soccer moms. The impending movie moment caught up to me soon, though, as I looked up from the drive-through register and saw the same withered face smiling up at me. It was as if something told me the next move I made in that moment was going to define this story. However, I had a job to do. So I opened the window and calmly took his money. "Hello?" He greeted me warmly, as if there was nothing strange about him finding my place of work. Being young and really naive, I brushed it off. Perhaps I just hadn't noticed him in the store before, I reasoned. "I noticed your car in the parking lot, and it being a rare color, I thought I'd come say hi, bring you a gift." He chuckled, extending a booklet out to me that told me it was all about Fiats. "I circled your model and some things I think would make it look cool." Unsure about what to do, I thanked him, took the thick packet inside the window, and told him to have a great day. I'd hoped that'd be the last I'd see of him. I didn't hear from that man for the rest of the day, or even the next day, once again letting the thought of him slip through my mind, as if though he was just another face asking me for coffee. 3 days later, walking out to my car after work, I found someone had left a whole tire leaning against my car, and a note that said, "Just in case, wouldn't want you hurt." A dread came over me as I struggled to load the tire into my back seat, since I was unsure of what else to do with a whole tire. I refused to go home until my coworker could tail me and make sure that I made it without incident. But like fate had been set by that tire, the next day my back left one blue, making it so I had to use the one sitting in my back seat. And the coincidence made me feel almost thankful for this strange gift. Almost. The next day, another shift passed quietly. I said goodbye to my coworkers and headed to my car, wondering if I'd find anything this time. No windshield notes, nothing littering the surrounding area, but sitting down in my car seemed off. I could have sworn that I left my psychology book in my back seat, but I was now looking at it open in my passenger seat. I brushed it aside, assuming I had just placed it there while looking for my work apron. Laughing it off, I drove off to see my friend Josh in his place of work, about 65 miles from my hometown of Lancaster. 45 minutes into my long drive, I felt my skin crawl, as if someone was watching me. I was on edge. That's when I looked over and I saw him. One lane to the right, keeping pace with me. Against every instinct that I had to slam on the brakes, I kept going, calling Josh to explain my situation and letting him know why I was probably going to be late. And then I called my dad. At the time, I never thought to call 911 because the person I knew as my protector was my father, a captain in the Burbank Fire Department. We chatted for a time and ended the call after he asked me if I was sure I'd seen that man or if I was just on edge. I admitted I could no longer see him in any of the few cars around me at the time, and might have just been making things up. Not quite convinced that I had been seeing things, though, I kept my eyes moving while navigating the streets of Long Beach. I couldn't see him, but I had a feeling that he could see me and was about to make himself known. Emotionally exhausted and wanting to get dinner, that moment came about 35 seconds later as I pulled up to a stoplight around 10:45 p.m. There was a knock on my window. Looking up, I saw the familiar greasy hair attached to the withered skull I had grown to dread, the face that started to torture my dreams and followed me home, the face that I would never truly feel safe from. Deciding that it was worth it to get away, I slammed the accelerator down, ignoring the red light. He followed as fast as his old legs could take him back to his car. I went straight into panic mode. Never having been put in a situation like this, I was unsure of what to do. Not wanting to bother my dad again so late at night, I figured the most logical thing to do would once again call Josh. He worked as a first responder and would surely know how to handle this. As Josh directed me to a Smart and Final parking lot near his work, I could still see the now sunflower yellow Fiat, no longer the original ice blue that I'd known the first time. I learned later that he liked to trade them in at least every week. New colors kept things interesting. Still on the phone, I finally reached the Smart and Final I thought he was talking about and asked what my next move was. While we both tried to remain calm, the thought of calling the police still didn't cross either of our minds. He yelled at me to get my ass under another car and hide. When I could not see the man following me, I slammed in the first spot and jumped out, dropping to the ground and rolling my ass under the next car. Pressing myself as hard as I could into that pavement, it felt as if I was absorbing the pebbles, like the dirt and I were becoming one, like I would never come up. At least, that's what I prayed for as I finally heard a car roll up behind me. His shoes scraping along the blacktop over to the front of my little orange car, lingering and lingering where he stopped. Standing there so long that I thought the sun was going to come up at any moment. The seconds felt like hours. Eventually, he shuffled away, the worn leather loafers scraping by just inches from where I lay, silently crying, holding my shirt to my face, muffling any noise that might slip out. I'd become the girl in a horror movie. I wasn't much for praying back then, but that night, I begged God for my life. I prayed that he was too old, that the years had been so unkind, that he wouldn't be able to crouch down and look under that car, even if he thought that I was there. By some grace, he gave up, went back to his car, and drove off. I still lay there under that car, convinced he was waiting for me, and when I finally peeled myself up from the SUV that shielded my terrified bodies, I was curious as to what he'd been looking at and stole a quick glance at the hood before getting in. On it, I saw one perfect handprint, like he'd been making sure that it was really my car, feeling the engine for warmth. That night, I stayed with Josh, unable and unwilling to drive home in the dark, even though I had work the next day. I planned to leave early. When I told him what happened, he seemed alarmed and told me some old white dude had been hanging around my car for a couple days and resolved to calling the cops next time we saw him. Next time came later that evening, about 5 hours into my 8-hour shift, when I got pulled aside and told the man had been spotted again, and this time he had my car door open. There are few things that can make a person's blood run cold, and let me tell you, this is one of them. I was not allowed to my car after that, and the cops were called. The officer sat me down with a worried look and asked if I was sure that I did not know this man, because based off the note in a book he had left in my car, he sure seemed that he knew me. Dear Jennifer, the note read, giving the impression he thought that was my name. How very fitting that Romeo and Juliet were what I was planning to leave you before I found this. Our love is forbidden, but our children will be beautiful. I've highlighted your options in the baby book. The deputies brought in the envelope, and I later learned it to be college transcripts of a man named Doug from his time at UC Berkeley in the psychology department, and as well as the book of baby names, all that he left on my seat. The cops took that book and his transcripts with them that night. and I took with me the fear of knowing that this man knew how to get in my car without my permission. There was a deputy posted in the parking lot of my apartment complex, but that did little good for my overactive imagination. So stressed that I was losing hair in chunks daily. Every little noise could be him. The next morning, I got a call from my uncle Jason, worried after he'd talked to my dad and heard what was happening, offering to let me stay in his extra room out in the La Mesa area of San Diego. He offered me a break from the chaos that was now my life, reassured me that there was no way he would find me here. Declining his offer, I thought of the lease that I just signed with my roommate, who was already pissed off about my stalker, and reassured him that I would be fine, then went about my day getting ready for work. The last straw came 2 days later. Visits from Doug increased, and he got very good at coming around when there was no one there to protect me. On a Thursday night in December, I walked out with my boss and another barista to a site that I still wake up in cold sweats over. Doug had left a body bag on my car with a note that said Colorado or bust. After getting a police escort home and making sure all of his gifts had been turned over as evidence, I packed up everything I could into my little orange car, buckled myself in, and headed off into the night, my uncle's La Mesa address in my GPS. A month farther into this manhunt for my stalker, the deputy assigned to my case called with information on Doug, who had a thing for Starbucks baristas and tortured another girl before me. No. The deputy told me they had found pictures he photoshopped of himself with the other barista, as well as some he'd taken of me. When asked to meet with her and testify against him where he found, I said yes before I could absorb what was told to me. All I knew was that he had done this before. He had put me through months of living in terror and suffering, and there was no way I was going to let him do this again. The end came without a bang, but more of a fizzle. No dramatics, just a quiet arrest. A plainclothes officer had seen him on the streets of our town, recognized him as a high priority, and made the arrest. I saw Doug one last time on the day of his preliminary trial. He looked at me only once, to glare at me when I answered yes to the inquiry if I believed that this man meant me harm. His face was gaunter than I remembered it, his eyes being swallowed by his skull, yet still just as terrifying. Hours later, the district attorney came to me and asked if I would like to know the reason this man became so obsessed with me. Why he followed me home. Why he made my life a horror story for these months. Keep in mind, this man is very unwell, he started. Doug saw a porn star he believed looked like you and decided you two were meant to be together. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense. He gave me an earnest look and walked away. After approximately 2.5 months of sleepless nights and wondering why this was happening to me, suddenly I was at the end, and his words meant nothing to me. I found no comfort in them. I was told in the weeks following that he pled guilty, receiving a minimum of 3 years in a care facility with a lifetime stay-away order for myself and the other woman he harassed. I know nothing of Doug, nor do I wish to. The one thing that I can thank this man for to this day is giving me a reason to leave, giving me the push to get away from my town and come to my home, San Diego, where I've made my own family, created my own dreams, and most of all, I've found myself here. For that, I thank Doug often. I've also learned that no matter what precautions you take, you can never fully avoid dangers or predators. When this happens, often it has nothing to do with whoever the object of fixation is. Sometimes it isn't something that you do or say. Sometimes people are just bad, and these things happen. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense.
Give it up for VAMP first-timer Jillian Rose.